She went into labor at midnight, crying for help. But her billionaire husband and his powerful family ignored every call. Alone, terrified, she sent one desperate text to the wrong number. What happened next would change her life forever. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. Rain hammered against the wide glass windows of the Donovan estate, each drop racing downward in glittering rivulets that shimmered whenever lightning split the sky. Inside, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the hum of wealth, Cassandra Donovan sat on the edge of her velvet chaise lounge, both hands clutching her belly as another sharp contraction rippled through her body. She was only 32 weeks pregnant. It was too soon, too sudden, and the pain was already unbearable. Her phone slipped in her trembling hands as she pressed her husband's number again. On the wall above her, a gilt-framed portrait of the Donovan family seemed to watch her with cold, painted eyes. Generations of men who had built an empire, their wealth carved into the marrow of the city. "Please, Adrian, pick up," Cassandra whispered through clenched teeth. Her voice shook with fear, but also with something far deeper. The aching loneliness that had haunted her since the day she married him. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. Her husband, Adrian Donovan, billionaire heir, CEO of Donovan Global, the man who graced the covers of Fortune and Vanity Fair, had ignored her call. Again, another contraction seized her, sharp and unforgiving. Cassandra cried out, her voice muffled by the walls of the cavernous room. She curled forward, sweat prickling her brow, as her baby kicked desperately inside her womb. The pain forced her to the floor. She clawed at the Persian rug, willing herself to breathe through it, just as the doctor had taught her. But the storm outside seemed to mock her efforts, thunder rolling like cruel laughter. When the contraction eased, she grabbed the phone again, her vision blurry with tears. This time she dialed Adrian's mother. "Pick up, please." The call connected, and for one brief heartbeat Cassandra felt hope. But then a familiar voice, cool and clipped, spoke. "Cassandra, do you know what time it is?" "Mother Donovan," Cassandra gasped. "Please, I need help. I think the baby's coming early. I can't reach Adrian. Please send someone." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "You're exaggerating again. You always do this. Adrian has important business tonight. Investors from Hong Kong. Don't disrupt him with your hysterics." "I'm not, I swear it's real. Please." But the line went dead. Her mother-in-law had hung up on her. Another contraction slammed into her body. Cassandra screamed this time, her nails digging into the rug. The chandelier above her swayed slightly, as though the storm itself was pressing against the glass walls of her prison. She tried calling Adrian again. Nothing. She tried his sister, his assistant, even the driver who usually lingered by the garage. No one answered. No one cared. Alone, abandoned, and terrified, Cassandra knew she was running out of time. She needed an ambulance. She needed someone. Anyone. Her phone buzzed weakly in her damp hands, the screen smeared with her sweat and tears. She pulled up Adrian's name one last time. Her thumb hovered over the call button. But then another contraction ripped through her, so fierce she nearly dropped the phone. Through blurred eyes, she tapped out a text instead. Her fingers shook violently as she typed. "Adrian, I'm in labor. Please, I need you. Don't let me do this alone." She hit send. For a moment, she thought she might pass out. Darkness edged her vision, but then through the haze of pain, she heard the soft ding of her phone, the sound of a reply. Her heart leapt. Adrian had answered. With desperate hands, she opened the message. But instead of her husband's cold efficiency, the words that filled the screen were unfamiliar. "I don't think you meant this for me. But are you okay? Where are you?" Cassandra blinked, confusion flooding her. She scrolled back to the number she had sent the message to. Her heart plummeted. Through her tears and the chaos of contractions, she had mistyped. The message hadn't gone to Adrian at all. It had gone to a stranger who had actually answered. Another contraction seized her. Cassandra doubled over, but her grip on the phone tightened. For reasons she couldn't explain, those few words from an unknown number gave her more comfort than all the years of Adrian's indifference. Her thumbs flew clumsily across the screen. Please, I need help. The baby, it's too soon. I'm alone. The reply came almost instantly. Stay calm. Tell me your address. I'm coming. Lightning lit up the room, throwing Cassandra's reflection into the glass walls, pale, drenched in sweat, eyes wide with terror. Somewhere outside, a car engine roared to life. For the first time that night, hope flickered in her chest. Not because of her husband, not because of his powerful family, but because of a single wrong text. Miles Bennett was not a man who usually checked his phone at midnight. Most nights, his device lay abandoned on the nightstand while he sat by his small oak desk, writing in longhand. An old habit, a stubborn refusal to surrender every part of his life to glowing screens and digital distractions. But tonight, sleep had evaded him. The storm outside rattled his apartment windows, each crack of thunder stirring restless memories he had spent years trying to bury. He sat in his armchair with a half-finished glass of bourbon, staring at the rain-streaked city skyline. The buzzing vibration on his desk startled him. He almost ignored it, assuming it was some promotional email or another late-night notification from a news cycle. But something made him check. Maybe the silence in his apartment felt too heavy. Maybe he needed a distraction from his thoughts. The message lit his screen. Adrian, I'm in labor. Please, I need you. Don't let me do this alone. Miles froze. He read it twice, 3 times. The words pulsed against the backdrop of lightning flashes, urgent and trembling. It was obvious this wasn't meant for him. He didn't know an Adrian. He didn't know anyone expecting a baby. And yet his chest tightened. This wasn't some random drunk text or wrong number. This was a cry for help. For a long moment, Miles stared at the screen, his logical mind insisting he should delete it, roll over, and forget it ever arrived. But then he pictured a woman somewhere out there, clutching her stomach, terrified, abandoned by the man she thought she could count on. He knew what that kind of abandonment felt like. His fingers moved almost without permission, typing out the reply. I don't think you meant this for me, but are you okay? Where are you? The response came quickly, frantic. Jagged? Please, I need help. The baby, it's too soon. I'm alone. Miles was on his feet before he'd even processed the decision. He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair, slipped his phone into his pocket, and shoved his keys into his hand. The storm outside meant the streets would be dangerous, but every instinct in his body told him this was no time for hesitation. He typed as he moved. Stay calm. Tell me your address. I'm coming. When the address appeared on his screen, he nearly cursed aloud. The Donovan estate. Even people who never read the business section knew the name Donovan. Adrian Donovan was one of the most powerful billionaires in the city. His family's name was stitched into skyscrapers, engraved on hospitals, plastered across universities. They lived in a world so far above Miles's own that it was practically another planet. But none of that mattered. Not if a woman inside that mansion was terrified, abandoned, and about to bring a child into the world alone. Miles ran down the stairwell of his apartment building, the smell of damp concrete rising as he pushed through the doors into the storm. His car, an aging black sedan that had seen better days, groaned as he started the engine, but it obeyed him. He swerved out onto the slick streets, wipers thrashing against sheets of rain. As he drove, He thought about the desperation in her words. He imagined her lying somewhere inside that glittering palace of wealth, calling out for a husband who didn't answer. Something in that thought ignited a fury in him. Miles had grown up watching his mother sit by the window, waiting for a man who never came back. His father had walked out when Miles was only 9, leaving behind nothing but debts and broken promises. He remembered the way his mother's hands trembled when she realized she had been abandoned, the way her eyes grew hollow in the months that followed. No woman deserved to feel that kind of loneliness, least of all while bringing a child into the world. The Donovan estate appeared like a mirage through the sheets of rain, its tall iron gates gleaming under the lightning. Miles rolled down his window, rain pelting his arm, and leaned out to buzz the intercom. No response. He pressed again. Nothing. Gritting his teeth, Miles slammed the car into park and leapt out, sprinting through the storm. He gripped the cold iron bars of the gate and shook them furiously. The mansion loomed in the distance, its golden lights glowing faintly through the storm, a cruel contrast to the silence of its gates. The intercom crackled suddenly. A man's voice irritated. "This is private property. Who are you?" "I'm here for Cassandra Donovan." Miles shouted over the rain. "She's in labor. She needs help." There was a pause. Then the voice snapped back. "There's no need for dramatics. Mrs. Donovan is fine. Go home." The intercom went dead. Miles's blood boiled. Fine? Did they think a woman would send messages like that if she was fine? He pulled out his phone again, hands shaking with rain and anger. He typed, "They won't let me in. Can you reach the door?" The reply came a minute later, strained, broken by pain, trying contractions too close. "I don't think I can." Miles's heart slammed against his ribs. He couldn't waste another second. He ran back to his car, slammed the door shut, and sped toward the side road that wrapped around the estate. He knew enough about these mansions to guess there'd be a service entrance or delivery access. If the front gatekeepers wanted to play games, he'd find another way. The storm whipped branches across his windshield, but he didn't slow down. He found what he was looking for, a smaller, less guarded gate that likely opened to the kitchens and service wing. This time, when he buzzed, no one answered. The lock was sturdy, but the storm had loosened the ground beneath it. Miles braced himself, shoved his shoulder against the gate, and after 2 painful tries, it swung open with a screech. He didn't stop to think about how many cameras were catching his every move. He didn't stop to wonder if security guards would drag him out. All he could see was the image of Cassandra, a woman he had never met, clutching her belly in agony, alone in a mansion filled with people who didn't care. He dashed across the soaked lawn, shoes sinking into the grass, until he reached a side door. He tried the handle unlocked. Inside, the air was warm and perfumed, the floors gleaming with marble. The storm's roar dulled into a distant hum, but the silence of the house was worse. "Cassandra," he called out. His voice echoed against the high ceilings. For a moment, there was no answer, only the faint ticking of some expensive clock down the hall. Then, faint and broken, "Here." The sound came from the sitting room. Miles sprinted toward it, heart hammering. She was on the floor, curled against the chaise lounge, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale. Her hands clutched her belly, and her phone lay inches from her outstretched fingers. When her eyes met his, relief flickered across her exhausted features. You came," she whispered. Miles knelt beside her, carefully brushing damp curls from her forehead. Her skin burned hot beneath his touch. "I told you I would," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time that night, Cassandra believed it. The storm outside still battered the windows, but Cassandra barely heard it anymore. Her world had shrunk into the rhythm of contractions, each one stealing her breath and twisting her body into agony. Miles knelt at her side, His arm braced around her trembling shoulders. He had never met her before this night, but instinct had taken over. She was fragile in his arms, yet fierce in her determination to hold on. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said, his voice steady though his pulse raced. She nodded weakly, her lips pale. "The baby's too early. I'm scared." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "But you won't do this alone. I promise." He slipped his arm under her knees, lifting her gently. She gasped at the sudden movement, clutching his shirt with surprising strength. Miles carried her through the silent, cavernous halls of the Donovan mansion, past chandeliers dripping with crystal, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to sneer at his intrusion. Not a soul stopped him. No servants, no guards. It was as if the house itself had abandoned her, just like her husband had. By the time he reached the car, Cassandra was shaking violently. He eased her into the passenger seat, buckled her in, and sped into the night. The storm thrashed against the sedan, but Miles drove with laser focus, weaving through slick streets toward St. Mary's Hospital. "Breathe with me," he coached, glancing at her between swipes of the wipers. In out slow, her breath hitched, but she tried, clinging to his voice. Each contraction ripped through her with brutal force, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Between them, her phone buzzed again. She fumbled for it with trembling hands. For a second, hope flared in her eyes. But when she unlocked the screen, her face crumpled. Nothing from Adrian. Just missed calls from a driver. A text from her sister-in-law reminding her about a charity gala. Not one word from her husband. The silence was more painful than the contractions. By the time they reached the hospital, nurses rushed forward with a wheelchair. Miles stayed at her side, his hand clasped in hers, as they wheeled her through gleaming corridors into the delivery ward. "Are you family?" one nurse asked sharply, eyeing Miles's rain-soaked jacket. He hesitated, then met Cassandra's eyes. She nodded faintly, her lips parting around a whispered plea. "Stay." Miles straightened his shoulders. "Yes, family." The nurse accepted it, pushing him into the sterile, bright room where Cassandra's cries filled the air. Doctors swarmed around, voices brisk and clinical. But Miles focused only on her. Hours blurred. The storm outside faded into dawn. Cassandra gripped his hand so tightly he thought she might break his bones. But he didn't let go. He murmured encouragement between her screams, wiped sweat from her brow, and anchored her through the chaos. Finally, as the morning sun spilled gold across the horizon, a cry pierced the room. Sharp, fragile, miraculous. The baby. The doctor lifted the tiny, squirming form into the light. Cassandra sobbed, both hands reaching weakly. Miles's chest ached as he watched her cradle her newborn daughter against her heart. The baby's cries softened at once, as if she knew she was finally safe. She's perfect," Cassandra whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. Miles swallowed hard, unable to speak. He felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not since before the betrayals, before the loneliness. Hope. When the nurses finally left them alone, Cassandra turned her tired gaze toward him. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Miles said quietly. "I know you were alone when you shouldn't have been. I know no one deserves to go through this the way you did. And I know that I'd do it again without hesitation." Her eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. She only looked down at her baby girl, who had fallen asleep against her chest. For the first time since the contractions began, Cassandra allowed herself to breathe. But rest brought memories, unwelcome, painful ones. Cassandra remembered the first time she had met Adrian Donovan. The charity gala, the flash of cameras, the way he had swept into the ballroom with the confidence of a man who owned not just the room, but the world. He had noticed her almost immediately, or at least that's how it had seemed. The way his dark eyes lingered across the champagne glass in her hand, The way his smile had melted her doubts. For a girl who had grown up modestly, who had worked hard just to secure a place in the city's publishing industry, Adrian felt like a fairy tale. He wooed her with private jets, diamond bracelets, weekends in Paris. He told her she was special, that she was different from the rest, and for a while she believed him. But wealth is shadows. The Donovans were an empire, and Cassandra had never been more aware of her outsider status than the day she married into them. Adrian's mother had measured her like merchandise, finding flaws in her posture, her background, even her smile. His father had barely concealed his contempt, muttering about women with no pedigree. Adrian had promised to protect her. He had promised to love her above them all. But promises were paper-thin in a house built on power. Slowly, the private jets turned into lonely dinners. The diamond bracelets were locked in velvet boxes she never wore. Adrian's attention wandered to work, to investors, to whispered rumors of other women. Cassandra had learned to smile through it, to hide the cracks, to tell herself it was worth it, because he would always be there when it mattered most. Until tonight. Until the night she went into labor, and her calls went unanswered. Until a stranger's reply had given her more comfort than her husband's silence ever had. Back in the hospital room, Cassandra kissed her baby's tiny forehead. The infant stirred softly, her lips puckering in sleep. "What will you call her?" Miles asked gently. Cassandra hesitated, then whispered, "Grace." "Grace," Miles repeated. The word felt right, a fragile miracle born from suffering. Cassandra leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion weighing down her eyelids. But before sleep claimed her, she looked at him again. "Why did you come?" she asked softly. Miles met her gaze. "Because someone needed to," he said simply. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not heavy like the silence of the Donovan estate, but warm, like an unspoken promise. And as Cassandra finally drifted into sleep with her baby cradled in her arms, Miles sat by her side, watching over them. The storm had passed, but something new had begun. Not just a birth, not just survival, a connection, born from one wrong text. Adrian Donovan woke to the sound of rain easing against the glass wall of his penthouse suite. Sunlight seeped cautiously into the room, golden rays stretching across silk sheets and discarded cufflinks. He stirred, groggy, head heavy from too much whiskey the night before. Beside him, the other side of the bed was empty. Not unusual. He rarely remembered the names of the women who drifted in and out of his nights anymore. What did it matter? They were diversions, nothing more. Adrian stretched, reaching for his phone. Dozens of notifications blinked across the screen. Business alerts, market updates, invitations. He scrolled absently until one detail caught his attention. Missed calls. Cassandra. A dozen of them. His brow furrowed. He hadn't even heard the phone ring. His driver had texted too. Urgent messages he'd ignored in the haze of bourbon. Then the truth crashed over him. The due date. The baby. Adrian sat up sharply, a hollow pit forming in his stomach. He had promised Cassandra he'd be there. He had told her not to worry, that she could rely on him when the moment came. But where had he been? Wasting away the night with strangers and expensive liquor. He dialed her number immediately. It rang, then cut to voicemail. He tried again, pacing the suite, dragging a hand through his dark hair. No answer. A curse ripped from his throat. He barked at his assistant over the intercom, demanding the car be brought around. Within minutes, he was descending in the private elevator, his reflection fractured in the mirrored walls. For the first time in years, Adrian Donovan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Fear. The Donovan estate looked pristine as ever when he arrived, the storm having washed the marble steps clean. But inside, the silence was wrong. Too wrong. No Cassandra. No baby's cry. When he stormed through the halls, his mother appeared, her expression tight with irritation. "You're making scene," she hissed. "This is not the way a Donovan should behave." "Where is she?" Adrian snapped. His mother's lips pressed thin. "She left. Hours ago." "Left?" "She was in labor. Taken to St. Mary's." "Not by us," she cut in, her disdain sharp as glass. "A stranger carried her out like some hero from a storybook. And you were nowhere to be found." Adrian froze. The words sliced deep, though she spoke them with no pity. A stranger? The image seared into his mind. Cassandra, vulnerable and frightened, clinging to someone else. Someone who had been there when he had not. "Didn't anyone stop him?" he demanded. His mother's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you should ask yourself why no one trusted you to show up in the first place." The words hit harder than any slap. By the time Adrian reached St. Mary's, Cassandra had already given birth. Nurses moved briskly in and out of her room, whispering with awe about the mysterious man who hadn't left her side. Adrian strode through the corridor like a storm contained in a tailored suit. Heads turned. Power followed him wherever he went. But today it felt hollow. He stopped at the door. His hand hovered over the handle, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since his first $1 million deal. He told himself she would forgive him. She always forgave him. But when he entered, the sight before him made his chest constrict. Cassandra, pale but radiant, lay propped against the pillows. In her arms, their daughter slept peacefully, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. And beside her sat the stranger, tall, rugged, rain-streaked jacket still draped over the chair. Miles. Adrian didn't know his name yet, but he hated him instantly. Cassandra's eyes flicked up at the intrusion. They lingered on Adrian for a moment, unreadable, before drifting back to her baby. "You came," she said, her voice flat. "I should have been here," Adrian admitted, stepping closer. "I'm sorry. Her sharp inhale stopped him, not from pain, but from something colder. "You weren't," she said simply. Adrian faltered. He had expected tears, accusations, maybe even relief. But her calm, unshaken tone unsettled him. He turned to the stranger, anger flashing. "Who are you? What are you doing in my wife's room?" Miles rose slowly, his gaze steady. "I'm the man who answered when she called for help." The words landed like a punch. Adrian's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "This is my family," Adrian said, voice low. "Not yours." Miles didn't flinch. "Then maybe you should have acted like it." The silence that followed was unbearable. Cassandra closed her eyes briefly, her hand stroking the baby's head. For the first time since Adrian had met her, she didn't try to soften the edges. She didn't rush to shield him from blame. She let the truth hang heavy in the air. Adrian stayed for hours, though Cassandra barely spoke to him. He watched the stranger move with quiet confidence, adjusting pillows, fetching water, calming the baby when she stirred. Every gesture was intimate in its simplicity, the kind of care Adrian had rarely shown. Jealousy twisted inside him, but beneath it was something worse. Shame. He replayed every missed call in his head, every moment he had chosen the easy indulgence of distraction over responsibility. And now, as his daughter slept in another man's shadow, Adrian realized wealth couldn't buy back what he had lost in a single night. Still, he told himself it wasn't too late. He was Adrian Donovan. He didn't lose. Not deals, not power, not people, especially not his wife. That night, as Cassandra drifted into exhausted sleep, Adrian stood by the window, staring at the city skyline. His reflection looked back at him, confident, controlled, yet hollow. He would win her back. He had to, but for the first time in his life, he wondered if his wealth would be enough. Cassandra stayed in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days of whispered footsteps in the halls, the quiet hum of machines, and nurses checking vitals with practiced efficiency. But inside her room, 2 men embodied the pull of her divided world. Adrian, her husband, her daughter's father, arrived each morning in press suits, his cologne sharp, his expression unreadable. He carried expensive flowers, boxes of hand-selected chocolates, even a platinum rattle from Cartier. His words were always the same. Apologies, promises, declarations. At this time, things would be different. Miles was quieter. He didn't bring extravagance. He brought warm blankets when the air conditioner bit too cold, ice chips when her throat was dry, whispered reassurances when Grace whimpered in the night. He didn't make promises. He simply stayed. And that was what unsettled Cassandra most. Because for the first time in years, someone staying felt louder than all the words Adrian had ever said. On the third morning, Adrian arrived earlier than usual, striding into the room with his assistant trailing behind, arms full of gift bags. Cassandra, nursing Grace, looked up warily. "I've made arrangements," Adrian said, waving the assistant away. "When you're discharged, you won't return to the estate. Not until renovations are complete. I've secured a private penthouse suite downtown, 24-hour staff, full security. A nursery designed by the best." Cassandra blinked. "Renovations?" His jaw tightened. "The house isn't suitable. Not after what happened. You deserve better. Grace deserves better." She looked down on her baby, her voice low. "I didn't need a better house, Adrian. I needed you." For a moment his facade cracked, but then he crouched beside her, his hand brushing the edge of the blanket. "You have me now," he said. "I'll make it right. Whatever you want, name it. Money is no object." Cassandra's throat tightened. Once those words had dazzled her. Once the glitter of his wealth had seemed like safety. But now, with Grace's soft breaths warming her skin, the offer rang hollow. "I don't want your money," she whispered. Adrian flinched, as if she'd struck him. Miles, sitting quietly in the corner, looked away, giving her privacy. But his silence carried weight, a reminder that love couldn't be bought, only given. By the time Cassandra was discharged, Adrian had already arranged a dinner at the Donovan mansion. "It's important," he insisted, "for the family. They want to see the baby." Cassandra hesitated. The thought of walking back into that house, of facing those cold eyes and sharper words, made her stomach churn. But she also knew refusing outright would ignite a war. Miles drove her home from the hospital, Grace cradled in her arms. He didn't ask questions, didn't push. Only when they reached her temporary apartment, the modest place she'd insisted on instead of Adrian's penthouse, did he speak. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," he said quietly. She looked at him, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he agreed, but his eyes held a steady fire. "Just remember, you get to choose what Grace grows up around. You don't owe anyone your silence." The words stayed with her long after he left. The dinner was everything Cassandra feared. Crystal glasses gleamed under chandelier light. Silver cutlery clicked against porcelain. The Donovan elders sat like judges at a tribunal, their comments wrapped in civility but barbed with disdain. "How quaint," Adrian's mother murmured as she peered at Grace. "She doesn't have the Donovan eyes. Perhaps she'll grow into them." Cassandra forced a smile, her grip tightening protectively around her daughter. Adrian attempted to counterbalance their cruelty with performative affection, standing behind Cassandra's chair, kissing the top of her head, telling his parents to be kind. But his touch felt staged, his apologies rehearsed. Halfway through the meal, Cassandra excused herself to the nursery they'd hastily prepared. Alone with Grace, she exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was there, in the quiet, that her phone buzzed. A single text from Miles. "How are you holding up?" Her eyes stung, because in that moment, surrounded by luxury and legacy, the only voice that made her feel seen came from outside these walls. Later that night, when Cassandra returned to her apartment, Adrian was waiting at the door. He had dismissed the chauffeur and bodyguards, standing alone like a man unaccustomed to solitude. "Cassandra," he said softly, "I know I failed you, but don't let that stranger wedge himself between us. He doesn't belong in our world." Her heart twisted. "He belongs in my world if he shows up when I need him. Can you say the same?" Adrian's jaw tightened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside gleamed a necklace, diamonds strung in delicate fire. "Let me give you the life you deserve," he said. "Don't throw it away for someone who can't give you anything." Cassandra looked at the necklace, then at Grace asleep in her bassinet, then back at Adrian. And for the first time since she married him, she didn't feel tempted. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice steady. "The life I deserve isn't one you can buy." She closed the box and set it gently on the counter. Adrian stared at her uncomprehending, as if the rules of his universe had just been rewritten. Later that night, when the city had gone still, Cassandra sat by the window, rocking Grace in her arms. The storm had passed days ago, but inside her, one still raged. Her husband was offering everything except the one thing she wanted most: presence, reliability, love unmeasured by price tags. And then there was Miles, a man with no empire, no fortune, no reason to be there, except that he chose to be. She glanced at her phone again, rereading his message. "How are you holding up?" Simple. Genuine. For the first time in years, Cassandra felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders, and she knew which way her heart leaned. The days following Cassandra's discharge settled into an uneasy rhythm. Grace's soft cries punctuated the nights, Cassandra's exhaustion deepened, and Miles quietly became part of her new normal, helping with groceries, fixing the leaky faucet in her apartment, rocking Grace when Cassandra's body trembled with fatigue. For the first time since marrying Adrian, Cassandra felt something resembling peace. Not opulence, not grandeur, just peace. But peace in the Donovan world never lasted. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Adrian appeared unannounced at Cassandra's apartment. He didn't knock, he never did. The concierge had let him up without question. That was the Donovan name. Doors opened, questions silenced. Cassandra was nursing Grace on the couch when Adrian's shadow filled the doorway. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "I came to see my wife and my daughter." His eyes scanned the modest apartment, his lips tightening. "You shouldn't be here. It's beneath you, Cassandra." Beneath her. She adjusted the blanket over Grace. "It's where I feel safe." Adrian took a step closer, his gaze darkening. "Safe? With him?" Her stomach twisted. "With who?" "Don't insult me." He pulled his phone from his pocket, swiping the screen before thrusting it toward her. There, glowing in digital clarity, was a photo. Miles leaving her building the night before, his jacket slung over his shoulder, a grocery bag in hand. Cassandra's breath caught. "You're having me followed?" "You're my wife," Adrian said coldly, "and he's circling you like a vulture. I won't stand by while some nobody tries to steal what's mine." Her pulse raced, fury and fear mingling in her veins. "I'm not yours, Adrian. Not anymore. And Grace isn't a trophy to be fought over." His eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Cassandra froze. Miles's voice came through warm, familiar. "Cass, it's me. I brought dinner." Adrian's face hardened, and just like that, the fragile calm of Cassandra's world shattered. Miles stepped inside, holding a takeout bag and looking startled to find Adrian there. "Ah," Adrian said with icy precision, the intruder himself. Miles set the bag on the counter, his posture calm but steady. "I didn't know you'd be here." "You shouldn't be here," Adrian snapped. "This is my wife, my child. You have no place in this home." Cassandra rose, holding Grace protectively. "Stop it, both of you." But Adrian pressed forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you think she'll choose you, Miles? A man with nothing?" No money, no status, no name? What can you possibly offer her? Miles's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. I can offer her what you never did. Time, care, presence, love. The words landed like a slap. Adrian laughed bitterly, though his eyes burned with something less certain. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't build a legacy. Cassandra stepped between them, her voice trembling but fierce. Stop, both of you. This isn't about money or legacy. It's about grace. It's about what kind of life she grows up in. And I won't let her live in a house full of betrayal and coldness. Adrian's expression flickered. For the first time, there was a crack in his armor, a shadow of uncertainty. But pride quickly sealed it. He straightened, his voice like steel. You'll regret this, Cassandra. Choosing him over me. You're walking away from a world people would kill to have. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. No, Adrian. I'm walking away from a prison. Adrian's gaze darted between her and Miles, fury warring with something deeper. Fear. He turned sharply, storming out, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Miles exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I didn't come here to start a war. Cassandra looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the storm raging around her. It was already started, she whispered. 2 days later, retaliation came. Cassandra received a letter from Donovan Global's legal team. It was written in polite, professional language, but the message was chilling. Adrian was petitioning for full custody of Grace. Her hand shook as she read the words aloud, her breath catching at the phrases. Concerns over maternal stability, undue influence from outside parties, the best interest of the child. Miles found her in tears, the paper crumpled in her fist. He can't take her from me, she choked. She's all I have. Miles took the letter, scanning it, his jaw tightening. This is intimidation. He thinks money and power can decide everything. Her chest heaved. And maybe he's right. Judges listen to men like him. He'll bury me in court. Miles knelt beside her, his eyes steady. Not if you fight, and not if you're not alone. Cassandra met his gaze, and for the first time since the stormy night she'd gone into labor, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt resolve. That evening, Cassandra stood by the window, watching the city lights blink like stars. Grace slept in her bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling. Adrian had made his move. The war for control had begun. But Cassandra realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her daughter. And when she turned to see Miles watching her, quiet but unwavering, she knew something else too. She wasn't fighting alone. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Cassandra sat at the long oak table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Grace wasn't allowed inside, but she could almost feel her daughter's presence with every heartbeat. On the opposite side sat Adrian, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit, his expression calm, confident, as if he were negotiating a business merger rather than trying to take a child from her mother. Flanking him were 3 lawyers in expensive suits, their briefcases brimming with documents. Cassandra had only one lawyer, a kind but clearly outmatched public advocate recommended by Miles's cousin. Yet when she glanced over her shoulder, there was Miles, seated in the gallery, his eyes locked on hers. Steady, grounding. The judge entered, and the room rose. The battle for Grace began. Adrian's lead attorney rose first, voice smooth and rehearsed. Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mr. Adrian Donovan, is gravely concerned about the well-being of his daughter. Mrs. Cassandra Donovan has demonstrated instability, recklessness, and a troubling reliance on an unrelated man of questionable means. This environment is not conducive to the child's best interest. Cassandra's stomach churned. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but her lawyer pressed a gentle hand to her arm, signaling patience. The attorney continued, parading photos of Cassandra's modest apartment, receipts showing Miles had purchased groceries, even security footage from Adrian's investigator Miles carrying Grace to her car seat. Your Honor, the lawyer concluded, this is not about wealth versus poverty. It is about stability versus chaos. Mr. Donovan can provide every resource, every opportunity, every safeguard. Mrs. Donovan, despite her intentions, cannot. The words rang heavy in the silent room. Her lawyer rose next. His voice lacked the polish of Adrian's team, but it carried sincerity. Your Honor, this is not a case of neglect. This is a case of abandonment. On the night Cassandra went into premature labor, Mr. Donovan ignored her calls. His entire family ignored her calls. She nearly delivered her baby alone. The courtroom murmured. Adrian's jaw tightened. And who was there? The lawyer pressed, lifting a document. An ordinary man who received her plea for help by mistake. A man who rushed to her side when her own husband would not. That is the so-called unrelated man Mr. Donovan speaks of. That man saved 2 lives. Cassandra felt heat flood her cheeks as the lawyer turned toward her. Cassandra is not unstable. She is resilient. She is not reckless. She is courageous. And she is not alone. She has built a support system where her husband failed to provide one. For the first time, Adrian's confident mask faltered. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Mrs. Donovan, she said directly, do you believe your husband is fit to raise your daughter? The room held its breath. Cassandra rose slowly. Her voice shook at first, but grew steadier with each word. Your Honor, Adrian can give Grace anything money can buy, but what he can't give her is presence. He wasn't there when she came into this world. He wasn't there when I was terrified and alone. And if he couldn't show up, then why should I believe he ever will? Her words hung in the air like thunder. The judge's gaze softened just slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Donovan. You may sit. When the session adjourned for recess, Adrian stormed past Cassandra without a word, his expression stormy. But outside, in the courthouse hallway, he caught her arm. You think this is over? He hissed, his voice low but venomous. You humiliated me in there. But I don't lose, Cassandra. Ever. She wrenched her arm free. This isn't about you. It's about Grace. Miles appeared at her side, his presence like a shield. Back off, Donovan. Adrian's eyes flicked to Miles, brimming with disdain. Enjoy playing hero while it lasts. She'll come crawling back when she realizes love doesn't keep the lights on. But Cassandra didn't flinch this time. She looked Adrian square in the eye. I'd rather sit in the dark with someone who loves us than drown in light with someone who doesn't. Adrian faltered, just for a moment. Then he walked away, his polished shoes echoing against marble floors. The hearing stretched over days. Witnesses spoke, doctors, nurses, even the neighbor who had rushed to Cassandra's side before the ambulance came. Adrian's lawyers threw everything they had, but the truth remained unshaken. Cassandra had been abandoned in her most vulnerable moment. Finally, the judge delivered her decision. Full custody will remain with the mother, Mrs. Cassandra Donovan. Mr. Donovan is granted visitation rights, contingent upon demonstrating genuine commitment to his daughter's well-being. Relief crashed over Cassandra like a wave. Tears blurred her vision as she gripped the table, her whole body trembling. Behind her, Miles let out a quiet breath of victory. Adrian sat stone-faced, his empire momentarily useless in the face of truth. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Cassandra kept her head high. Grace cradled safely in her arms as Miles shielded her from the frenzy. You did it, he murmured when they reached the car. No, she whispered, gazing at her daughter's tiny face. We did. And for the first time since her wedding day, Cassandra felt free. Not because the Donovans had been defeated, but because she had chosen love and truth over fear and wealth. The weeks following the custody battle felt like a fragile kind of peace. Cassandra settled into her life as a single mother, learning the rhythm of Grace's cries, her giggles, the soft weight of her against her chest. Miles was there often, his presence a steady anchor, bringing meals, fixing things around the apartment, sometimes just sitting quietly with her when the exhaustion pressed too heavily. But freedom from Adrian came with its own cost. The Donovans were not a family accustomed to losing. Within days of the verdict, tabloids exploded with headlines. Donovan heiress rejected, custody battle exposes billionaire scandal. From mansion to apartment, the fall of Cassandra Donovan. Photographers camped outside her building. Neighbors whispered in the lobby. Strangers pointed on the street. One afternoon, as Cassandra pushed Grace's stroller through the park, a reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Mrs. Donovan, how does it feel to walk away from billions? Do you regret your choice?" Cassandra tightened her grip on the stroller and kept walking, but her heart pounded. Grace stirred, sensing her mother's unease. Miles appeared at her side, his hand lightly touching her elbow. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They feed on pain." She looked at him, grateful. "They make me feel like I can't breathe." "Then breathe here," he said simply, tapping his chest. And for a moment she did. One evening, Cassandra returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. No name, no return address. Inside was a check. The amount was staggering, enough to buy a house, a future, security for Grace. Attached was a note in Adrian's unmistakable handwriting. "Take the money. Give me Grace. You'll never struggle again." Her hand shook as she read the words. For a fleeting second, she thought of the relief it could bring. No more bills piling up. No more fear of the future. Grace would grow up with every advantage. But then she thought of the night she gave birth. The silence of unanswered calls. The hollow ache of being invisible to the man who vowed to protect her. Tears blurred her vision. She crumpled the check and threw it into the trash. When Miles stopped by later and found her sitting on the floor, shaking, he crouched beside her. "What happened?" She handed him the note. His jaw tightened as he read it. Then he tossed it into the trash beside the ruined check. "He thinks everything has a price," Miles muttered. Cassandra's voice cracked. "What if I can't give Grace the life she deserves?" Miles cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You already are. She doesn't need millions. She needs love. She needs you. And if you let me, she can have me too." Her breath caught, her chest aching in a new, unfamiliar way. The next morning, Cassandra woke to the sound of laughter. She stumbled into the living room to find Miles sitting on the floor, Grace balanced carefully on his knee. He was making faces, his deep laugh mixing with her baby giggles. The sight stopped Cassandra in her tracks. For so long, she had dreamed of a family. Not a perfect one, not a wealthy one, just one filled with love. And here it was, forming quietly before her eyes. Later, as they shared coffee, Miles glanced at her, his voice softer than usual. "You know, when I got that text that night, I thought it was a mistake. But now I think it was fate." Cassandra's heart skipped. She wanted to say something, to admit that she felt it too, that this man had become more than a friend, more than a savior. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with fear and hope. Instead, she whispered, maybe it was. Despite her resolve, Adrian's presence lingered like a storm cloud. He sent gifts she refused, letters she returned unopened, flowers that withered in the trash. But the hardest blow came when Grace turned 6 months old. Adrian requested visitation. Legally, Cassandra couldn't deny it. She handed Grace over at the courthouse, her heart shattering as Adrian's chauffeur-driven car pulled away. Miles touched her shoulder gently. She'll be okay. It's just a few hours. But those hours felt like years. When Grace was finally returned, she was safe, unharmed. But Cassandra's chest ached with the reminder that Adrian would never fully disappear from their lives. Still, as she rocked her daughter to sleep that night, Miles's voice echoed in her memory. She doesn't need millions. She needs love. And Cassandra knew which world she wanted her daughter to grow up in. The first snow of winter dusted the city in white, turning even the most ordinary streets into something magical. Cassandra stood by the window of her small apartment, watching the flakes fall against the glass. Grace was asleep in her crib, her tiny breath soft and steady, her hand curled around her favorite blanket. Behind her, Miles sat at the table, scribbling notes on a pad. He'd been helping her plan out a modest budget, showing her how to stretch what little she had without losing her dignity. You make it sound easy, she murmured, smiling faintly. Miles looked up, his eyes warm. It's not easy, but it's possible. And possible is enough for now. She studied him for a moment, the soft lamplight catching the lines of his face. He wasn't polished like Adrian, but there was strength in him. A quiet, unshakable strength that had carried her through the darkest nights. And in that moment, she realized she loved him. Later that evening, after Grace was asleep, Cassandra sat beside Miles on the couch. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. I need to tell you something, she whispered. He turned toward her, eyebrows raised. I don't think I would have survived these last months without you. You've been more than a friend, more than... I don't even know what word to use. You're just... Her voice broke. Miles reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. Cass, you don't have to explain. I know. Tears pricked her eyes. But you deserve to hear it. I love you, Miles. The words hung in the air, trembling between them. Miles's breath hitched, his steady composure finally cracking. He cupped her face, his voice low, rough with emotion. You don't know how long I've waited to hear that. And then, for the first time, his lips met hers. It wasn't the fiery, consuming kiss she once knew with Adrian. It was something deeper, gentle, certain. The kind of kiss that promised a future instead of a fleeting moment. Their fragile happiness didn't last long. 2 weeks later, Adrian appeared at her door again, this time carrying a box of expensive toys and a diamond bracelet in a velvet case. Cassandra, he said, his voice unusually soft. Let me in. She hesitated but opened the door just enough to block his path. I don't want your gifts. This isn't about gifts. His eyes flickered toward the crib, where Grace stirred softly. I've made mistakes, but I can change. I want us to try again. For her. Cassandra's chest tightened. There was a time when she would have clung to those words, desperate for even a scrap of affection. But now she saw them for what they were. Desperation wrapped in empty promises. Adrian, she said quietly, you had your chance. On the night Grace was born, you showed me exactly where I stood in your world. And I won't let my daughter grow up thinking that's what love looks like. His mask cracked, anger flashing in his eyes. So this is about him, isn't it? He sneered. That man, that stranger. You think he can give you more than I can. Miles stepped into the doorway, his shoulders squared. I don't have more, Donovan, but I give what you never could, all of myself. For a moment, Adrian seemed ready to fight, his fists clenching at his sides. But then he looked past Miles at Cassandra holding Grace, her expression calm, resolute, unshaken. And Adrian Donovan, the man who conquered boardrooms, who commanded fear and respect, realized he had lost. He set the box on the floor, his voice sharp with bitterness. You'll regret this. Cassandra shook her head. No, for the first time I won't. He left without another word. That night, after Grace was tucked back into her crib, Miles sat beside Cassandra on the couch. He took her hand, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. You know, he began slowly. Families aren't always built the way we expect. Sometimes they're chosen. Her throat tightened. What are you saying? He took a breath. I'm saying let me be hers. Officially. Permanently. Not just the man who answered the wrong text. Let me be the man who raises her, who stands by you. Let me be your husband. Cassandra's heart thudded so hard she thought it might burst. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Miles. 1,000 times yes. The next morning, Cassandra woke with Grace nestled in her arms and Miles asleep on the couch, his jacket draped over his shoulders. The snow outside had melted, the city humming with life again. But inside, in her small apartment, Cassandra felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear, not loneliness, not longing, hope. And as she gazed at Grace's tiny face, she knew their story wasn't one of loss anymore. It was one of beginnings. The spring sun bathed the park in golden light, casting dappled patterns through the branches of blossoming cherry trees. Cassandra smoothed the soft satin of her simple ivory dress, her hands trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. Grace, dressed in a tiny lavender gown with a ribbon in her curls, giggled as she tugged at her shoes. Miles stood beneath an arch woven with wildflowers, his eyes never leaving Cassandra. He wore no tuxedo, just a clean navy suit that fit his broad frame. But to Cassandra, he looked more than a man. He looked like the promise of forever. The guests were few, neighbors who had become friends, a handful of Miles's coworkers, and Cassandra's grandmother, who had flown in from the countryside, her eyes brimming with pride. There were no society reporters, no lavish decorations, no billion-dollar estates looming in the background. Just love. When Cassandra reached him, Grace clutching her hand, Miles bent to kiss the little girl's cheek before taking Cassandra's trembling fingers in his. The officiant's voice carried softly over the breeze. Marriage is not built on wealth or status, but on trust, respect, and the courage to love without condition. Cassandra's throat tightened. Memories of that stormy night, her unanswered calls, her lonely walk into the hospital, flashed through her mind. And then the message to a stranger. The moment her life turned. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Miles, you came into my life when I was broken, when I thought love was just a word people use but never meant. You showed me that real love isn't diamonds or mansions. It's showing up every single day. It's laughter in the kitchen. It's holding me when I cry. It's loving Grace as if she were your own. I promise to love you with the same fierceness, to build a life with you brick by brick, no matter how simple it looks from the outside. You are my home. Miles blinked rapidly, emotion shining in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. Cass, I don't have the wealth to promise you the world, but I can promise you my heart. Every day, every night, every breath. You and Grace are my family, my forever. I will never turn away when you call. I will never let you stand alone. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Grace clapped her tiny hands at the sound of his words, as if sealing their vows with her innocent joy. When they kissed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The reception was a picnic beneath the trees. Children play tag, while adults laughed over shared dishes. Cassandra and Miles sat on a blanket with Grace between them, her chubby fingers smearing icing from the wedding cake onto her cheeks. For the first time in years, Cassandra felt light. The weight of betrayal, loneliness, and fear had melted into something brighter. Her grandmother leaned down to kiss her forehead. You did it, child. You found your happiness. Cassandra smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I think happiness found me. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Cassandra's apartment. The handwriting was sharp, almost angry. Adrian's words were brief. You made your choice. Don't come back when all falls apart. Adrian Donovan, Cassandra folded the letter once and set it in the fireplace. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need his threats. The flames devoured the paper quickly, leaving nothing but ash. Grace toddled into the room just then, her tiny arms reaching upward. Cassandra scooped her into her embrace, breathing in her baby's warmth. Miles walked in from the kitchen, carrying mugs of tea, and Cassandra smiled. This was her life now, and she wouldn't trade it for all the diamonds in Adrian Donovan's world. Years passed. Grace grew into a spirited little girl, with her mother's eyes and Miles's easy laugh. She never knew the pain of being unloved, for in their small but joy-filled home, love overflowed in every corner. On Grace's 6th birthday, Cassandra watched as Miles helped their daughter fly a kite in the park, his laughter mingling with hers in the open air. Her heart swelled. She had once begged for love from a man who saw her as an accessory. Now, she was cherished by a man who saw her as everything. And in the quiet of her soul, she knew one truth. She had chosen right. Love, not money, had rewritten her story, and it was the happiest ending she could have ever imagined.